I never thought I'd say this, but after spending a week in what people call paradise, I ended up questioning everything I knew about tropical destinations. You see, everyone told me Boracay was a dream, the place where turquoise waters meet powder white sand, and time somehow slows down. And they weren't wrong. But what happened when I decided to extend my trip and hop over to Malaysia? Well, that's a story that completely changed how I look at travel. Before I get into the insane experiences that caught me completely off guard, let me take you back to where this all started. I landed in Boracay on a Tuesday afternoon, and honestly, the moment my feet touched that famous white sand, I understood the hype. The beach stretched endlessly in both directions. The water was so clear I could see my toes wiggling in the sand beneath the surface. And everywhere I looked, there were these picture-perfect moments just waiting to happen. I checked into my beachfront hotel, dropped my bags, and immediately headed out to explore. The island has this energy, you know? It's buzzing with tourists, lined with restaurants serving fresh seafood. And there's always music drifting from somewhere. I spent my first evening watching the sunset while sipping on a mango shake, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is what people save up for years to experience. The next few days followed a beautiful pattern. Wake up to the sound of waves, grab breakfast at one of the local cafes, where they serve these incredible pancakes topped with fresh tropical fruit, then spend hours either lounging on the beach or trying water activities. I went parasailing, which gave me this bird's eye view of the entire island and the patterns the water made from up there. The way the shallows created these ribbons of different blue shades. It was mesmerizing. I tried stand-up paddleboarding, failed miserably at it actually, and spent more time in the water than on the board. But even that was fun. The locals were friendly, always ready with a smile and recommendations for the best spots to eat or explore. But here's where things started shifting in my mind. By day 4, I noticed something. Every beach looked similar. Every sunset spot had the same crowd doing the same things, and the restaurants, while serving delicious food, started feeling repetitive. Don't get me wrong. Boracay is stunning, and if you're looking for a straightforward beach vacation where you can disconnect and just exist in a beautiful place, it delivers on every promise. But I started feeling this itch, this curiosity about what else was out there. I had originally planned to spend my entire week in Boracay, but one night, while scrolling through my phone, I came across some photos of Malaysia that a friend had posted months ago. Dense jungles, vibrant cities, food that looked unlike anything I'd seen, and beaches that somehow looked different from the ones I was currently experiencing. Something in those photos spoke to me, and before I could overthink it, I was looking at flights. There was one leaving the next afternoon that would get me to Kuala Lumpur by evening. I sat there for probably 20 minutes, going back and forth in my mind. Should I stick to the original plan and enjoy the simplicity of Boracay, or should I take a chance on something completely different? The not knowing, that feeling of standing at a crossroads, it was both terrifying and thrilling. I booked the flight. I had 3 days left of my trip, and I decided to give Malaysia a shot. This decision, this impulsive choice made at 11 at night, while sitting on a hotel balcony in the Philippines. It ended up being one of the best travel decisions I've ever made. The flight itself was uneventful, just a few hours of watching clouds and wondering if I'd made the right call. When we started our descent into Kuala Lumpur, I pressed my face against the window and saw this sprawling city with skyscrapers piercing through the evening haze, lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set, and somewhere in the distance, I could make out dense green forests. It looked like a completely different world. I grabbed my backpack from the overhead bin, went through immigration, and stepped out into the Malaysian night. The first thing that hit me was the air. It was thick and warm, carrying scents I couldn't quite identify, a mixture of spices and flowers and something earthy. I hopped in a taxi, and as we drove toward the city center, I watched the streets transform from airport roads to bustling urban corridors filled with people, street food vendors, and buildings that seemed to blend traditional architecture with modern design. My hotel was in the heart of Kuala Lumpur, and after checking in and dropping off my stuff, I knew I couldn't just stay in my room. It was already past 9 in the evening, but the city outside my window was alive. I walked out onto the street and immediately felt overwhelmed in the best possible way. There were people everywhere, not tourist crowds like in Boracay, but locals go about their evening. Families dine at outdoor tables, street vendors calling out their offerings, the sizzle of food being cooked right there on the sidewalk. I followed my nose to a nearby night market, and what I found there, it was sensory overload. Stalls lined both sides of the narrow street, selling everything from clothes to electronics to handmade crafts. But it was the food section that captured me completely. I'm talking about satay being grilled right in front of you, the smoke rising and carrying that charred, spice smell that makes your mouth water instantly. There were these enormous woks where vendors were tossing noodles with practiced ease, flames leaping up dramatically with each toss. I saw whole fish being grilled, their skin crisping perfectly, and vendors brushing them with sauces that looked like liquid gold in the market lights. There were desserts I'd never seen before, colorful layers in glasses, shaved ice topped with ingredients I couldn't name, and pastries that seemed to be flying off the trays as fast as they were being made. I didn't know where to start, so I just started pointing and nodding, collecting small portions from different stalls. I found a plastic stool at a communal table and sat down with my haul. The first bite of satay, the way the peanut sauce complemented the smoky meat, the slight char on the edges, I closed my eyes and just experienced it. Then I tried these rice noodles that had been stir-fried with prawns and vegetables, and the depth of flavor, the way every ingredient maintained its identity while contributing to this harmonious whole. It was like nothing I'd tasted in Boracay. I'm not saying Filipino food isn't good. It absolutely is, but this was different. This was layers upon layers of taste, each bite revealing something new. I spent 2 hours at that night market, eating my way through stall after stall, talking to vendors who were eager to explain their dishes, learning words in Malay that I definitely mispronounced, and watching the organized chaos of a city that clearly knew how to feed its people. When I finally made it back to my hotel, stuffed and happy, I lay in bed thinking about the contrast. In Boracay, I had felt relaxed, peaceful, almost sedated by the beauty and simplicity. Here in Kuala Lumpur, I felt energized, stimulated, like every sense was being engaged simultaneously, and I still had 2 full days to explore. The next morning, I woke up early, mainly because my body was still adjusting to the different time zone, and decided to visit the Batu caves. I'd seen photos of the giant golden statue and the colorful steps leading up to the caves, and I wanted to experience it myself. The journey, there was an adventure in its own right. I took the train, which was clean, efficient, and filled with locals commuting to work. Everyone was polite, making space, and I noticed how diverse the crowd was. Malay, Chinese, Indian faces, all coexisting in this mobile community, heading in different directions. When I arrived at Batu Caves, nothing could prepare me for the scale of it. The golden statue of Lord Murugan stands at over 40 meters tall, and it's magnificent. But what really caught my attention were the steps. 272 steps, each one painted in bright rainbow colors, leading up to the cave entrance. There were monkeys everywhere, and I'd been warned about them, how they could be aggressive if you had food, so I made sure my bag was zipped tight. I started climbing, and with each step, I could feel the spiritual significance of this place. Hindu devotees were making the climb, some barefoot, some carrying offerings, and there was a sense of purpose in the air. About halfway up, I paused to catch my breath and looked back. The view of the city sprawling in the distance, framed by the cave entrance and that massive golden statue. It was a kind of moment that makes you grateful you decided to travel. Inside the caves, the atmosphere shifted completely. It was cool and dim, with natural light filtering through openings in the limestone ceiling. There were shrines built into the cave walls, incense burning and the sound of prayers echoing off the stone. I watched the family perform a ritual, the father carefully lighting candles while the children stood quietly, respectfully, and even though I didn't understand the specifics of what was happening, I could feel the reverence. This wasn't a tourist attraction playing its spirituality. This was a real, living religious site that happened to welcome visitors. I spent over an hour exploring the different cave chambers, watching the light change as the sun moved across the sky, and feeling humbled by the history and faith that permeated every corner. Coming down those colorful steps, I realized something. In Boracay, everything had been curated for relaxation and pleasure. The beaches were maintained, the activities were designed for tourists, and the experience, while beautiful, felt somewhat contained. Here in Malaysia, I was experiencing something real and unfiltered. These caves existed long before tourism. The city functioned with or without visitors, and I was getting to witness authentic culture rather than a version created for foreign consumption. That realization, it shifted something in me. I got back to the city center and decided to just wander. No plan, no destination, just walking. I ended up in Chinatown, where the streets were narrow and buildings seemed to lean toward each other, creating these shaded corridors lined with shops selling everything imaginable. I found a small temple tucked between modern storefronts, its doors open and welcoming. Inside, locals were praying, burning incense, and going about their spiritual practices without any awareness of or concern for the tourists who occasionally wandered in. I continued walking and somehow ended up in Little India. The transformation was immediate. The shops now displayed vibrant saris, gold jewelry glinted in windows, and the air was thick with the scent of curry spices and jasmine flowers. I passed a restaurant, and the smell pulled me inside. I ordered a banana leaf meal, something I'd never tried before, where they serve your rice and curries on an actual banana leaf. The waiter explained how to eat it, mixing everything together with my hand, and while I definitely made a mess of it, the flavors were incredible. Each curry had its own distinct personality, from fiery hot to subtly sweet, and the way they all came together on that banana leaf, it was like a masterclass in balance. After lunch, I walked some more and found myself at the Petronas Twin Towers. These iconic structures that I'd seen in countless photos. Standing there in person, craning my neck to see the top, it was surreal. The towers gleamed in the afternoon sun, their steel and glass facades reflecting the sky and clouds. I went up the sky bridge that connects the two towers, and from that vantage point, I could see the entire city spreading out in every direction. Dense urban areas giving way to green spaces, roads forming intricate patterns, and in the far distance, the hint of mountains. It struck me how Malaysia had managed to modernize without completely erasing its past. Old mosques stood near modern shopping centers. Traditional food stalls operated in the shadows of skyscrapers, and somehow it all worked. That evening, I made my way to Jalan Alor, a street famous for its food stalls. If I thought the night market for my first evening was impressive, this was on another level. The entire street was closed to traffic and transformed into an open-air restaurant. Tables and chairs lined both sides, and in between, vendors cooked everything you could imagine. I saw whole stingrays being grilled and covered in spicy sambal, chicken wings that had been marinated in some secret sauce and barbecued until the skin was crackling, and noodle dishes being prepared in woks, so hot that the flames leapt higher than the cook's head. The noise level was incredible. Vendors shouting their specials, the sizzle and pop of cooking, conversations in multiple languages, laughter, the scrape of chairs, all of it blending into this symphony of urban dining. I sat down at a table and ordered probably too much food, but I couldn't help myself. Everything looked too good to pass up. While I was eating, I started chatting with a Malaysian couple at the next table. They asked where I was from, what brought me to Malaysia, and when I told them about my last-minute decision to leave Boracay and come here, they laughed and said I'd made the right choice. They spent the next hour telling me about their country, recommending places I should visit if I ever came back, explaining the mix of cultures that makes Malaysia unique. The husband was Chinese-Malaysian, the wife was Malay, and they talked about how this diversity, while sometimes challenging, created a richness in their daily lives. The food, the festivals, the languages, everything blended together creates something distinctly Malaysian. By the time I left Jalan Alor, it was late, and I was exhausted but exhilarated. I had one more day in Malaysia, and I knew I wanted to see something outside the city. I'd heard about the beaches on the East Coast and the islands, but I didn't have time for that. Then someone mentioned the Cameron Highlands, a hill station a few hours from Kuala, Lumpur, known for its tea plantations and cool climate. It sounded perfect. I booked a day tour that would pick me up early the next morning and take me there and back in one day. It would be rushed, but I wanted to experience as much as possible. The bus picked me up at 6 in the morning, and as we drove out of Kuala Lumpur, I watched the city give way to smaller towns, then to countryside, and finally to winding mountain roads. The landscape changed dramatically. Dense tropical forests covered the hillsides, mist clung to valleys, and the temperature dropped noticeably. We passed waterfalls cascading down cliff faces, small villages perched on hillsides, and eventually we entered the highlands proper. The air was crisp and cool, such a contrast to the heat of the city, and everywhere I looked, there were shades of green the first didn't know existed. We stopped at a tea plantation, and walking through those endless rows of tea bushes, the plants reaching my waist and stretching the horizon, it was meditative. Workers were picking leaves with practiced efficiency, their fingers moving quickly, and I tried my hand at it, managing to pick maybe a dozen leaves in the time it took them to fill their baskets. We visited the tea factory where they explained the process of turning those fresh leaves into the dried tea we drink. The smell in that factory, earthy and slightly sweet, was intoxicating. We got to sample different teas, and I'm not usually a big tea drinker, but sipping a cup of freshly made tea while overlooking the plantation where it was grown, understanding the labor and care that went into it, made me appreciate it in a completely new way. The tour took us to a strawberry farm next, which felt almost surreal given that we were still in Southeast Asia. The cool climate of the highlands allowed for crops you wouldn't normally associate with this region. I picked strawberries straight from the plants and ate them right there, the sweetness exploding in my mouth, and bought a container to take back with me. We stopped for lunch at a local restaurant, and even here, hours from the city, the food was exceptional. I had a steamboat, which is like a hot pot where you cook your own ingredients in a simmering broth at your table. Fresh vegetables, mushrooms, meats, and noodles, all cooked to perfection and then dipped in various sauces. It was interactive, fun, and delicious. Sitting there with other travelers from the tour, sharing food and stories, I felt this deep sense of contentment. On the drive back to Kuala Lumpur, I stared out the window and thought about my week. The peace of Boracay, the excitement of Malaysia, and how different these two experiences were despite being separated by just a short flight. That evening, my last in Malaysia, I went back to the area near my hotel and just walked. I didn't want to pack yet. Didn't want to admit that this was ending. I found a small cafe and ordered a coffee, sitting at a table by the window and watching the city move past. People heading home from work. Groups of friends meeting up for dinner, street vendors setting up for the evening rush. There was a rhythm to it all, a pattern that I was now, briefly, a part of. I thought about how travel is supposed to broaden your perspective, challenge your assumptions, and introduce you to new ways of seeing the world. Boracay had done that to an extent, showing me beauty and teaching me to slow down. But Malaysia had shown me complexity, diversity, and the beauty that comes from layers of history and culture colliding and coexisting. I'm not saying Boracay wasn't worth it. It absolutely was, and I'm grateful for those days of simplicity and natural beauty. But what I discovered in Malaysia, that wasn't something I could have planned for or expected. It was a food that told stories of trade routes and immigration, the temples and mosques and churches standing within blocks of each other, the way ancient traditions thrived alongside modern technology, the warmth of people who took pride in sharing their culture with visitors. I realized that I'd been approaching travel with a limited perspective. I thought paradise meant pristine beaches and clear water, and while those things are beautiful, they're not the only definition of an incredible destination. Paradise can also be crowded night markets where you eat food you can't pronounce, or climbing colorful steps to ancient caves, or sipping tea in cool highlands while the world stretches out green and endless below you. Flying home, I looked through the photos on my phone. The Boracay photos were stunning, professional-looking shots of beaches and sunsets that could have been from a postcard. The Malaysia photos were messier, more chaotic, full of people and motion and life. Both sets were valuable. Both represented real experiences, but I knew which ones I'd look back on more often, which ones would make me smile and remember the feeling of discovery. I started thinking about my future travels differently. Instead of just seeking out the famous beach destinations everyone talks about, what if I look for places with depth, with layers, with stories to tell? What if I prioritize cultural immersion over Instagram moments, authentic experiences over curated perfection? I'm not trying to convince everyone to skip beach vacations. If that's what brings you joy, then absolutely do that. But what I learned from this trip, what I want to share, is that sometimes the best experiences come from unexpected detours. If I'd stuck to my original plan and spent all 7 days in Boracay, I would have had a nice vacation. I would have come home relaxed and with a good tan, but I wouldn't have this story. I wouldn't have tasted food that made me rethink what flavor could be, wouldn't have climbed those rainbow steps to Sacred Cave, wouldn't have watched the sunset behind the Petronas Towers while eating street food that cost less than a coffee back home, wouldn't have felt the cool highland air on my face while surrounded by tea plants. Malaysia blew me away not because it was better than Boracay in some objective sense, but because it offered something different, something I didn't know I was looking for. It challenged me, engaged me, and reminded me why I travel in the first place. Not just to escape daily life, but to experience new perspectives, to learn, to grow, to be uncomfortable, and then find comfort in unexpected places. The taxi driver who taught me Malay phrases during the drive to Batu Caves. The vendor who insisted I try her specialty despite the language barrier. The couple who shared their table and their stories with a stranger. These human connections, they're what transform a trip from good to unforgettable. In Boracay, I was a tourist being served an experience. In Malaysia, I was a participant, actively engaged with the culture, sometimes getting it wrong, often being surprised, always learning. So here's what I took away from all of this. If you're planning a trip and you're trying to decide between the safe, well-reviewed, picture-perfect option and the wild card, the place that intrigues you but scares you a little, maybe give the wild card a chance. Not instead of the safe option necessarily, but in addition to it, or on your next trip, or for part of your journey. Leave room for spontaneity, for last-minute flight bookings, for following recommendations from locals you meet, for trying foods you can't identify, and visiting places you've never heard of. Yes, there's comfort in the familiar, in knowing exactly what you're going to get. But there's magic in the unknown, in the possibility that around the next corner or across the next border, something extraordinary is waiting. My week that started in paradise and ended in Malaysia taught me that the world is vast and varied and full of surprises. It taught me that different doesn't mean better or worse. It just means different, and different is valuable. It taught me to question my assumptions about what makes a destination worth visiting. Most importantly, it taught me to stay curious, to keep exploring, and to never assume I found the best of anything, because there's always more to discover. Would I go back to Boracay? Absolutely. And next time I'd probably appreciate it even more for what it is. Would I go back to Malaysia? In a heartbeat, and I'd stay much longer, exploring the islands I didn't get to see, visiting more cities, diving deeper into the regional differences and cultural nuances. But more than revisiting either place, I'm excited about the destinations I haven't considered yet, the countries I've overlooked, the experiences I've dismissed because they didn't fit my preconceived notion of what travel should be. That's the real gift of this trip. Not the memories themselves, though those are precious, but the shift in mindset, the opening of possibilities, the realization that the world is full of places that will challenge and delight and surprise you if you give them the chance. So the next time you're planning a trip, whether it's a beach vacation or a city break or a mountain retreat, I'd encourage you to look a little deeper, research a little more, and maybe, just maybe, book that spontaneous flight to somewhere unexpected. Because you never know, that wild card destination might just blow you away.